But yeah,
Maybe,
that's my start there.
yeah, maybe it would be kind of a vague question, but to some extent, I guess we all try some kind of a multi-track recording right now because we do not have chances to sing with choruses and quartets. And what's the most difficult part of doing that?
What's the most difficult part of doing a multi-track?
Yes.
Or a recording? Yeah, or while doing a learning track. Well, I think it would be singing together and making sure that everything is lined up. It's really hard to sing with yourself, and it's hard even rhythm. It's hard when you're recording by yourself, and so I think singing with yourself is the hardest thing about recording learning tracks and recording multi-tracks. I've gotten very good at it, at singing with myself. I know when I'm going to turn, even on a ballad, ballads can be harder, but I know when I'm going to do something because I have learned how to use my voice to lead and cue the other parts to sing with me as a lead. So I think that's a big, that's a real challenge. Of course, tuning and all that stuff, it's just weird. It's a different environment. It's different than standing in a room with 4 people or 3 people and singing.
You usually start recording a lead first, and then add bass and very tenor.
Yeah, generally over the many years, it's been lead, bass, baritone, tenor. Lead in the afternoon, bass the next morning, and baritone and tenor that afternoon.
The time is important, right?
So that's very important to mention. I couldn't sing bass after I sang lead, but because bass for me, it only takes place in the morning. Although I will say lately I've been doing a little bit differently. Sometimes I'll record lead and then tenor, and then baritone, and then the next morning I'll do bass. And sometimes I'll do lead, then tenor, then bass in the morning, and then baritone as the final part. And I've found that to be interesting. I've actually enjoyed that. And not only does it work, but it changes it up for me. It's a different experience for me to sing tenor with the lead, just because tenor is my part. And I do think that there's something to be said for that lead and tenor driven sound in barbershop. A lot of times we think the tenors need to be hidden away, and I don't necessarily always believe that, obviously.
How long do you take to learn the songs before you actually record?
That's a good
Well, I sight read them. So
wow.
I just read the music. But I do look at them a little bit. I don't learn each part, but I do look at it. I try to, if there's a recording of it, I try to find that recording and just listen to it. So I hear, a lot of times I listen not because I need to hear the notes, but I want to hear the interpretation. For instance, I mentioned that I'm going to be recording Apple Blossom Time from Main Street. So I already have listened to Main Street's recording of the song so that I can basically get their interpretation. Because most of the time, groups that want to learn a new song that a famous quartet has done, normally they want to sing it with that similar interpretation. But besides that, if it's never been done before, I do my own interpretation, or I'll work with the arranger or the director to come up with the best plan that they'd like me to do. So I do go through that a little bit, but generally, even then, I'll still just start the song, and as I go along, I will figure out what the interpretation is, or I'll figure out, okay, this is what I want to do here. And so, yeah, I'm sight reading on all of the tracks. I don't learn the parts first.
Wow, before you. So is that a kind of straight through process? You actually start singing and then, whole song and then add other parts, or sometimes you revise or, record part of the songs and then combine it?
It can happen that way where I'll record a part and then I don't like it and I'll change it. But generally, once I have the lead part done, then the interpretation is how I am going to do it. Very rarely do I change it after I've recorded all of the parts. But I do them in takes, so I don't do one full lead. I don't do that. I sing until I've messed up. So I'll sing, and then when I'm not happy with a note, if I was flat, if I messed up a word, if I crack, or all that stuff happens when you're singing all the time. So when something bad happens, I stop. Wrong note, of course. And I'm a perfectionist. I want things to sound really good, and there is the ability to use pitch correction, Melodyne, and all sorts of things like that. And I do have that program, but I really try to get everything as lined up and perfect as I can before I goes. What I would use that. So on some songs I have 500, 600 takes. Some songs I have 1,500 takes. So there's a lot of work that goes into the recording. It's not just 1 part, 2 part, 3 part, 4 part done. It takes a long time for me to get it as good as I would like it to be.
Wow, it sounds really interesting behind the scenes. We don't all know that.
Oh, thanks.
Wow.
Do you use Logic to do like mixing and mastering?
So I have Pro Tools.
Pro Tools.
And I use that, but I also I started off with a program called Magic's Samplitude, and that is actually my favorite recording software to do learning tracks in. It just works really well, and maybe it's because that's what I started with, but I'm just really fast in that program. So generally I use that for recording learning tracks, and that's sort of my go-to, Magic's Samplitude.
Good to know. I never heard of it.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great
It's
program.
his job, but he knows everything. So you said it's your main job, selling learning tracks, and you're doing for a living. But so it's now your business. And can you talk about some other? I don't know if it's if appropriate questions, but would you mind talking about some business competitors in your field?
Business competitors, other people who do learning tracks. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot more now. When I started out, there were only a couple people that were doing learning tracks, and now there are many others who do learning tracks. I think some of them are really good, and I think some of them and if I'm being honest, I think some of them use shortcuts and it doesn't quite benefit groups as much as they might think. I've always said this, but I think the most natural presentation is the best presentation. Obviously, we want things to be lined up and in tune, and I think that's obviously important. It's a learning track, but I also think it needs to be natural, and it needs to be something that people can sing along with in their voice, and not try to sing like somebody else. And I think some people some people record. There's a way that they do it that it's impossible for it to be a natural sound that you would produce to match that. And we're so used to matching something as harmony singers. And there are only a few people, I think, that create a product that I think would be good enough for me to give to my chorus. Yeah, there are only a couple people that I would actually purchase their learning tracks to use from my groups because I think that they're a good model. There are others that I think do a good job, absolutely. And do they work for some people? Sure. And some people maybe they like that. But for me personally, I prefer the most natural sound. I want it to be, I don't want it to be so processed that you can't sing along with it. I won't name names in a bad way, but I definitely think that, but yeah, that's my honest opinion is that I think a lot of people can do it and a lot of people are doing it. I think there are only a few that do a fantastic job. I would say that is a great recording and a great learning track, and anybody can learn from that.
Agreed. Yeah.
And I think that is it's hard. And I don't mean this to sound negative, but it's hard in my job, in my business, because when I first started, I was one of the only people doing it. But now I do think sometimes you see people saying, well, this guy does learning tracks and he does it for really cheap, so I'll get that. Or some people that charge a lot of money for tracks that I don't think are that good. And And so, you know, it's a shame for me to see choruses going down that road. But that said, again, it's just a learning track. So for some people, they don't need the interpretation or the vocal inflection or the singability with it. They just want to learn their part. And that's fair. If people want that, then good for them. That's fine. But I think that for me, I've always tried to give people, and I think others do this as well, but I think I've always tried to give people the best starting point. To say, I'm trying to give you a real performance that you can take and then grow from there. Saki and I sang together in the Ambassadors of Harmony, and we've watched Jim Henry do that with songs, with ballads, that I feel like I did a good recording of it. I'm like, oh, I feel really good about this. It's emotional and it really flows well and it's great. And then I've watched Jim take that starting point and grow it into something even way better than I could have ever imagined.
Right.
But I don't, and I'm not trying to take credit for it, but I do think there's something to be said for that starting point. The starting point is high, and you're in, and you're doing something, and you're trying to emulate something that's really, really good, interpretively and hopefully vocally. And as amateur singers, sometimes it's easy to emulate what you've heard. I guess that's probably
right.
I'd like to say that. I feel we're all musicians, but some people will tend to just emulate what they hear. And then you're stuck with bad habits or something that you don't want. So